The sterile air conditioning bites at my bare arms. The wood of the conference table feels cold under my fingertips. It's just me, sitting here, and him, across the polished surface. The room stretches out, cavernous and silent, the city sprawling miles below us like a forgotten map. He doesn't meet my eyes, but his silence speaks volumes. A slow, deliberate quiet I've learned to dread. It's the sound of a door closing, a bridge burning, a future evaporating. The air crackles, thick and heavy, like the moment before lightning strikes. My heart hammers against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage I didn't know existed until this second. This isn't a conversation. It's an execution. And I can feel the blade poised above my neck. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Just a few months ago, this room, this building, it felt different. It felt like ours. A testament to late nights fueled by lukewarm coffee and shared dreams, to risks taken hand in hand, to the sheer, stubborn refusal to fail. He was the face, the dealmaker, the one who commanded attention in boardrooms. I was the engine, the architect of the operational beast, the one who made sure the gears turned, the product moved, the money flowed. Supply chain wasn't sexy, wasn't headline material, but it was the heartbeat of everything. I built it piece by painstaking piece. Found the suppliers, negotiated the contracts, mapped the routes, optimized the logistics. It was my domain, my intricate, beautiful machine that kept the whole damn thing alive. We were a force. Everyone said it. The golden couple of tech logistics. The ones who built an empire from a rented office and a shared laptop. Our evenings weren't fancy dinners. They were poring over spreadsheets on the living room floor, hashing out strategies, debating margins. Our arguments weren't about typical couple stuff. They were about freight costs and inventory turns. It sounds dry, I know, but for us, it was everything. It was our shared language, our passion, the very foundation of our life together. I trusted him implicitly. He was my partner in every sense, in business, in life, in the quiet intimacy of our home. We talked about the future constantly, expanding into new markets, building bigger warehouses, maybe one day, finally taking that long vacation we always promised ourselves. It was real. It felt unbreakable. Then the air shifted. Subtly at first. Little things. He started taking meetings I wasn't invited to. Emails stopped being copied to me. My opinion, once sought on every major decision, became secondary, then optional, then dismissed with a wave of his hand. He'd talk about restructuring, optimizing, words that felt like veiled criticisms of the very systems I'd built. When I asked about it, try to understand, he'd get defensive, irritable. Just focusing on the big picture, he'd say, or things are changing, we need to adapt. Adapt? I was the one who had always driven adaptation, who had built flexibility into the core of the operation. The distance grew, cold and palpable, not just in the office, but at home too. Our shared language became stilted, our evenings silent, filled with the unspoken tension of two strangers sharing the same space. I felt like I was walking on glass, every word, every move potentially shattering the fragile piece. I didn't understand. I racked my brain trying to pinpoint what I'd done wrong. Was I not pulling my weight? Was my part of the business not growing fast enough? Had I become complacent? I tried harder, stayed later, dug deeper into the numbers, found new efficiencies, presented new strategies. But nothing I did seemed to bridge the chasm that was opening between us. It was like watching a tide pull away from the shore, leaving me stranded on increasingly bare sand. The day he did it, the day he called me into this cold, silent room, felt both sudden and terrifyingly inevitable. He sat there, perfectly composed, his face a mask I didn't recognize. Not angry, not sad, just blank. Professional. He used words I'd heard countless times in corporate jargon, words designed to strip away humanity, to make painful decisions sound logical, necessary. He talked about strategic realignment, synergies, redundancies, and then he said it. The phrase that felt like a physical blow. We're eliminating your position. My position. My position? In our company? The words didn't make sense. They hung in the air, heavy and absurd. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the moment he'd break character and tell me this was some twisted joke. But his eyes, when they finally flickered towards mine, held nothing but cold, hard finality. He wasn't joking. He was serious. Effective immediately, he added, as if twisting the knife. HR will be in touch regarding severance. Severance. From the life I built. From the future we planned. From him. The room spun. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. The silence returned, thicker this time, suffocating. He had fired me. Fired me from our company. Our company. The words echoed in the void opening inside me. How could he do this? How could the man I loved, my partner, the one who had shared my dreams and fears, simply erase me like a line item on a budget sheet? It felt like a betrayal so profound, it went beyond business, beyond even our marriage. It felt like a violation of my very existence. I tried to speak, my voice a thin, reedy sound I barely recognized. What? Why? What are you talking about? He sighed, a sound of impatience, as if explaining the obvious to a slow child. It's a business decision. Pure and simple. Pure and simple? There was nothing pure or simple about this. This was brutal. This was personal. This was an act of war. He went on, his voice smooth and detached, talking about how my role was redundant in the new structure, how he needed different expertise to take the company to the next level. Every word was a lie, a calculated insult to everything I had contributed, everything I was. I was the bedrock of this company. I built the engine he drove. Redundant? It was laughable if it didn't feel like my world was ending. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and unwelcome. I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. Different expertise? I managed, my voice gaining a tremor of fury. My expertise built this. I built the supply chain that makes everything you do possible. He leaned back, a condescending smile playing on his lips. And it was valuable. For a time. But we've outgrown it. We need streamlining. Streamlining. Erasing me. It was clearer than any words. He wanted me gone. Out of the company. Out of his life. The business wasn't just a business anymore. It was his weapon, his tool to sever ties cleanly, legally, and with maximum damage to me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about my job. This was about everything. Our house, our shared life, everything we had built together was now being used to discard me. I stumbled out of the office, the corporate marble floor suddenly feeling alien and hostile. The faces of employees I had worked alongside for years seemed blurred, distant. I wanted to scream, to rage, to shatter the glass walls around me. But all I could do was walk, one numb step after another, carrying the weight of a world that had just imploded. When I got home, the key still worked for now. The house felt strange, filled with ghosts of shared moments, of laughter that now felt like a cruel mockery. He wasn't there. Of course not. He was at the office, already implementing his new structure, solidifying his solo reign. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. He didn't come home that night. Or the next. He sent a short, curt message through his lawyer. He wanted me out of the house. Immediately. He was changing the locks. He was freezing our joint accounts. Everything. He was using the full force of the legal system, the very system we had built our company within, to erase me as efficiently as possible. I was locked out physically, financially, emotionally. It was a level of cold, calculated cruelty I couldn't have imagined from a stranger, let alone the man I had shared my life with. My initial attempts to fight back were pathetic, fueled by raw emotion and desperation. I called the company's legal team, the same team I had hired and worked closely with for years. They were polite, regretful, and utterly useless. He's the majority shareholder. Legally, he can restructure the company as he sees fit. Your employment was at will. We advise you to seek independent counsel. Independent counsel. With frozen accounts? I was cornered. Every door I tried to open was slammed shut in my face.
He had planned this.
Meticulously. He hadn't just fired me. He had tried to make me disappear. I reached out to board members, key employees I thought were loyal, people we had celebrated successes with, mourned setbacks with. Some didn't reply. Others gave vague, apologetic excuses. It's a tough situation, just trying to stay out of it. Loyalty is complicated. Loyalty was apparently a one-way street, leading directly to whoever held the power. His power, now solidified, was absolute. He was spinning a narrative that I was incompetent, holding the company back, resistant to necessary change. He was poisoning the well, making sure that even if I could fight back, no one would listen. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone, facing a man who had turned everything I knew and loved into a weapon against me. I sat in a tiny, borrowed apartment, surrounded by a few suitcases of hastily packed belongings. My life, reduced to luggage. The contrast with the sprawling, luxurious life he was still living in the house we had built fueled a cold, simmering rage. I scrolled through social media, a morbid curiosity guiding my fingers. He was posting pictures from the office, smiling, shaking hands, talking about the company's exciting new chapter. His new chapter. With me neatly edited out of the frame. It was like I had never existed, never poured my blood, sweat, and tears into building the very foundation he was now standing on. The injustice of it was a physical ache. I felt helpless, defeated. There was nowhere left to turn. He had blocked every avenue, anticipated every move I might make. He had won.
He thought he had won.
I stared out the window of the small apartment, watching the city lights blur into streaks of color. Lost in the labyrinth of what-ifs and how-could-he's, my mind, usually sharp and strategic, felt like a tangled mess of emotional wreckage. He had taken everything. My job, my home, my financial security, my sense of self-worth. He had tried to bury me under the weight of his calculated cruelty. I felt the familiar weight of despair settling in, heavy and suffocating. How could I possibly fight this? He had the money, the power, the legal team, the narrative. I had nothing. Nothing. The word echoed in the silence of the room. Nothing. It felt true. Utterly, devastatingly true. And then a flicker. A tiny spark of something other than despair. A memory, distant at first, then sharp and clear.
Leo.
My cousin Leo. Leo wasn't part of our world. He wasn't in tech, wasn't in logistics in the way we were.
Leo was
different. He was quiet, understated, the kind of person you might not even notice in a room. He never chased headlines or sought the spotlight. While I was building operational efficiency on a smaller, public scale, Leo was building something vast, something unseen, something fundamental. He was in infrastructure. Big infrastructure. Global infrastructure. He owned things. Lots of things.
Ports.
Shipping lines. Warehouses the size of small towns. Freight forwarding companies that moved goods across continents. He didn't build companies to be famous. He built them to be essential. To be the pipes and wires of global commerce. He owned the plumbing. My company, the one I had built with my husband, relied on that plumbing. Every single product we moved, every shipment that went out, every component that came in, traveled through networks that were, in one way or another, connected to Leo. I knew he was successful, immensely so, but I had never truly grasped the scale of his operation. He was private, almost secretive about it. Our conversations were usually about family, about books, rarely about business details. I certainly never discussed the specifics of our company's supply chain infrastructure with him. Why would I? It was my domain, and his seemed so much bigger, so removed from our daily operations.
But now,
sitting in this borrowed room, the word infrastructure took on a terrifying new meaning. My supply chain might be the engine, but Leo owned the roads it traveled on. He owned the stations it stopped at. He owned the very air it breathed. If he chose, he could simply shut it off. The idea felt terrifying, audacious, maybe even impossible. Could Leo's web of ownership really extend to our specific carriers, our specific warehouses? I had built redundancy, contingency plans, backup suppliers into the system. I was proud of that. But had I truly accounted for a scenario where the entire underlying network disappeared? The thought sent a jolt of something electric through me, part fear, part exhilarating possibility.
He thought he had trapped me.
Locked me out. Taken everything. But maybe, just maybe, he had forgotten one crucial detail. One quiet, unassuming detail named Leo. He had focused on the visible, the legal, the corporate structure. He had overlooked the physical reality of how his precious products actually moved from point A to point B. He had fired the architect of the engine, but he had forgotten the man who owned the roads. The thought germinated, slowly at first, then growing with ferocious speed. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about turning the tables. Not just surviving, but winning. Winning bigger. Taking his perceived strength, the company itself, his control over its operations, and revealing it as his ultimate weakness. His dependence on the very system he thought he could simply discard me from. But acting on it was a different matter. Leo was family, yes, but he was also a force of nature in his own right. Calculating, ruthless in business, loyal to a very small circle. Would he even listen? Would he care about a spat between cousins by marriage, even one that had cost me everything? It was a risk. A massive, terrifying risk. But sitting there, with nothing left to lose, the risk felt less daunting than the prospect of simply fading away, defeated and broken, as my husband clearly intended. The decision solidified. It wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about survival. It was about justice. It was about showing him that you can't just delete someone's contribution, someone's life, and expect to get away with it. My despair hardened into a cold, sharp resolve. He had played his hand, a brutal, winning hand, or so he thought. It was time to see if he could handle the unexpected wild card I was about to play. It was time to call Leo. Getting Leo's number wasn't difficult. He wasn't hiding, just operating in a different sphere. Calling it was the hard part. My finger hovered over the screen for a long time. What would I say? How do you explain that the man who is technically family, who you built a life and a company with, has just utterly destroyed you? How do you ask for help from someone who operates on a scale you can barely comprehend, someone who likely sees my entire situation as small potatoes? I took a deep breath and pressed the call button. It rang twice. Then, Leo's voice, calm, quiet, utterly devoid of inflection. Yes.
Leo?
It's me. My name? A pause. Longer than it should have been. Then, I know. That was it. No surprise, no greeting, just I know. He knew? How could he know? Had news of my spectacular downfall already reached his ears? Or was there something else he knew? I pushed the thought aside. This wasn't the time for questions. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Leo, I need your help. Another silence. This one felt weighted, calculating. Help, he finally said, the word flat, neither inviting nor dismissive. I plunged in, the words tumbling out, raw and urgent. I told him everything. Not just the firing, but the lockout, the frozen accounts, the smear campaign, the sheer, brutal efficiency with which my husband had tried to erase me. I didn't beg, didn't plead. I stated the facts, cold and hard, laying out the betrayal like evidence. I described the company, the one we built, his reliance on its operational backbone. And then I got to the point. He fired me, I said, my voice firm now, losing its tremor. He thought he could take everything. He forgot. He forgot who built the system that makes it all run. And he forgot. He forgot who owns the rails. Silence again. This time it felt different. Not calculating, but considering. Weighing. The rails, Leo repeated, almost to himself. Your companies, I clarified, needing to be explicit. Your network. His supply chain, everything from port to warehouse to final delivery. It all touches your infrastructure. Every shipment, every component. It depends on you. It does, Leo confirmed, his voice still quiet, but with an undertone I hadn't heard before. Not malice, not sympathy. Something colder, harder. Like steel. He thinks he has control. I continued, pressing my advantage, the strategy forming clearer in my mind with every word I spoke. Absolute control. He's moving fast to cut me out, to solidify his position. He's planning major announcements, new deals, based on the assumption that the operation will continue to run seamlessly. And if it doesn't? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. If the product stops moving, I said, the words a promise and a threat. If the shelves are empty, if the deliveries fail.
His control dissolves.
Instantly. There was a long pause. I could almost hear his mind working, mapping the connections, assessing the leverage. He wasn't emotional.
He was strategic.
This wasn't about family ties, not entirely. It was about power, about influence, about the unseen hand that truly controlled the flow of commerce.
He saw it.
He saw the elegance of it. The sheer, brutal efficiency of hitting my husband where he was most vulnerable, using the very system I had built, the system he had dismissed me from, as the weapon. He owes you, Leo finally said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a judgment delivered from a place of undeniable authority. For the company. For the work.
For the
oversight, that last word, oversight, hung in the air. My husband's oversight. His forgetting. His fatal error. He does. I agreed, my voice steady. What do you want?
Leo asked.
Straight to the point.
No preamble.
This was it. The moment. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to just hurt him. I wanted to reclaim what was mine. To ensure he couldn't simply walk away with everything. And I wanted him to understand the true cost of his actions. I wanted him to see the foundation crumble. I want what's fair, I said, choosing my words carefully. A just dissolution of the partnership. My equity. Compensation for my work, for the years I poured into it. And then I added, the coldest words I'd ever spoken, and I want him to understand that he cannot build his future on the ruins of the past he tried to bury. Leo was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was still quiet, but held a chilling resonance. Consider the rails. Temporarily out of service. That was all.
No elaborate plan, no detailed instructions.
Just that single, simple phrase. Consider the rails. Temporarily out of service. It was a confirmation. A commitment. An unleashing of unseen forces. He would do it. Leo would do it. He would choke the very lifeblood of the company. And my husband, sitting atop his perceived empire, would have no idea what was happening until it was too late. A wave of cold power washed over me. Not exhilarating, but heavy. This wasn't sweet. It was necessary. He had shown me no mercy. I would show him the consequences of underestimating the quiet ones. The ones who built the pipes. The ones who owned the rails. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for him to step into it. I moved back to the small apartment, but the despair was gone, replaced by a tense, watchful calm. I started making different calls now. Quiet calls. To people who knew the inner workings of his side of the business, people who still held a sliver of respect for me, or perhaps just enjoyed watching power dynamics shift. I gathered information about key shipments, critical deadlines, important meetings he had scheduled. I didn't spread rumors or make threats. I just listened, collected facts, built my case. Meanwhile, my husband was making his moves. He announced the restructuring publicly, painting a picture of a forward-thinking company shedding dead weight. He finalized deals, signed contracts, talked confidently about unprecedented growth. He was flying high, oblivious. He saw me as a problem solved, a discarded piece of the past. He had no idea the past was about to rise up and consume his future. Leo worked in the shadows. Shipments began to mysteriously delay. Not all at once, nothing so obvious it would trigger immediate alarm. Just enough friction to gum up the works. A critical component delivery rerouted unexpectedly. A key overseas shipment held up in customs due to administrative irregularities at a port Leo happened to own. A crucial domestic freight line suddenly experiencing technical difficulties individually, they might be explained away as bad luck or typical logistical hiccups. Cumulatively, they began to create chaos. Calls flooded into the company's operations center. Clients were getting nervous. Production lines were slowing. My husband's new, streamlined machine was sputtering. He started to look stressed in the pictures circulating online. The confident smile was strained. He was barking orders, demanding answers, but no one in his new team seemed to understand why things were going wrong. They blamed suppliers, carriers, global issues. They looked for external causes, never suspecting the rot was coming from within their own foundation, the one I had built and he had disregarded. He hadn't just fired me. He had fired the person who understood the intricate dance of the supply chain, the one who knew how to troubleshoot, how to navigate the inevitable problems. His new expertise was useless against a crisis rooted in the very system he had outsourced mentally. The moment I chose for the climax was deliberate. A major press conference scheduled to announce a huge new partnership, the jewel in the crown of his solo reign. The event was set up in the company's new, modern atrium, all glass and steel, projecting an image of transparency and cutting-edge progress. He was there, beaming, surrounded by his new executive team, potential investors, key clients, and the press. The room buzzed with anticipation. He was about to deliver the keynote, to unveil his vision, to cement his victory. I arrived quietly, just another face in the crowd, dressed simply, a stark contrast to the power suits and expensive dresses around me. No one noticed me at first. I took a seat near the back, watching him. He looked powerful, confident, utterly in control. He had no idea. He began to speak, his voice amplified, filling the atrium. He talked about the company's history, carefully omitting my contribution. He talked about the future, his vision, the exciting new direction. He talked about efficiency, about seamless operations, about reliable delivery, promising their new partners unparalleled service. And that's when I made my move. I didn't interrupt him. That would be too small, too loud, too emotional. I had planned this with Leo. Leo's reach wasn't just physical, it was digital. As my husband was speaking, smooth and confident, a subtle change happened. The large screens behind him, intended to show slick graphics about the new partnership, flickered. They didn't display a message from me. That would have been a distraction. Instead, they displayed real-time data feeds, live tracking maps, manifests, dates, critical dates, and next to them, in stark red letters, the word, delayed. Not one shipment, not two, dozens. Across different carriers, different routes, different products. Key components for major production runs. Finished goods promised to anchor client launches. Every single item displayed on those screens was critical, and every single one was stalled. The data was undeniable, direct feeds from logistics platforms my husband barely understood, but which were the lifeblood of his business. Feeds that Leo had adjusted. The room started to stir. Whispers. Heads turned towards the screens, then back to my husband. His voice faltered. He glanced back, a puzzled frown creasing his brow. His new head of operations, standing behind him, went pale. The sheer volume of red text, the critical nature of the delayed items, hit them like a physical blow. He tried to recover, to wave it away. Just a temporary glitch, he stammered into the microphone, his confidence dissolving rapidly. Standard logistical adjustments. But it wasn't standard. The sheer scale was unprecedented. A journalist in the front row raised their hand. Mr. Husband's last name, is this related to the recent slowdowns some of your clients have been experiencing? Another hand. Can you confirm these are all critical shipments? Will this impact your Q3 projections? The questions came faster, sharper. The air, moments before filled with optimism, was now thick with doubt and fear. My husband was sweating. His smooth facade was cracking, revealing the panic beneath. He looked at his team, who could offer no answers. He looked back at the screens, at the irrefutable evidence of a system collapsing in real time. I stood up from my seat in the back. Quietly. No grand entrance. Just standing. His eyes, wide with panic, swept across the room, searching for something, anything, to make sense of the chaos. And then he saw me. His eyes locked onto mine. For a second, the polished room, the screens, the murmuring crowd faded away. It was just us again, like that day in the conference room, but the power dynamic had violently reversed. Disbelief warred with dawning horror on his face. He saw the quiet confidence in my stance, the lack of panic. He saw that I wasn't shocked by the screens. I knew. And in that moment, I think he finally understood. He understood the question he should have asked. He understood the piece he had overlooked. The architect of the engine was gone, but the owner of the rails was still here. And the rails were closed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The microphone captured only a choked gasp. The weight of the revelation, the understanding that the very foundation of his perceived power had been pulled out from under him, was crushing. He hadn't just fired an employee, he had severed his connection to the indispensable infrastructure his entire business depended on. And the person who held the key to reconnecting it was the person he had tried to destroy. He looked utterly blindsided. All his planning, his legal maneuvers, his carefully constructed narrative. None of it mattered when the actual flow of goods stopped. The company wasn't a legal entity on paper. It was a living, breathing network of physical movement. And I, with Leo's silent backing, had just flatlined it. The room dissolved into a cacophony of questions and flashing cameras. His press conference had become his public unraveling. He stumbled away from the podium, his face ashen, his new empire crumbling in front of a world. He had forgotten about the rails. And the owner of the rails remembered everything. The fallout was swift and absolute. The delays weren't temporary glitches. They were a complete cessation of service across critical routes. His company ground to a halt. Clients pulled out. The new partnership collapsed. Investors ran for the hills. His carefully built, new structure had no foundation to stand on. The legal maneuvers he had used to freeze me out financially and eject me from the house suddenly looked weak and desperate when faced with the imminent collapse of the entire business. He had traded a thriving company built on a solid foundation for a hollow shell built on sand, and the tide was coming in fast. He was forced to negotiate, not from a position of strength, but from a position of utter desperation. My terms were simple and non-negotiable, delivered through lawyers who finally saw which way the wind was blowing. A full, equitable dissolution of the partnership, recognizing my years of indispensable work. A significant settlement that went far beyond any severance and full ownership of certain assets related to the core operational infrastructure I had built, not the whole company, just the crucial pieces he had dismissed as redundant, the very pieces I knew how to rebuild and make profitable elsewhere. He tried to fight, to bargain, to invoke the legal documents he had so confidently used against me. But his leverage was gone. His company was bleeding out. The screens in the atrium, replaying the moment of his collapse online, were a constant reminder of his fatal miscalculation. He eventually agreed. He had no choice. The victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt cold, hard, and tinged with a deep sadness for the life that was shattered, for the trust that was irrevocably broken. He was ruined, not just financially, but in reputation. He had been so focused on taking everything from me, he hadn't realized he was simultaneously dismantling the very structure that supported him. He had forgotten the rails. And the rails don't forgive. I watched it happen, the slow-motion collapse of the empire we built together, the one he tried to claim as solely his. There was no joy in his downfall, only a quiet sense of vindication. I hadn't sought revenge for revenge's sake. I had sought justice, a rebalancing of a scale he had brutally tipped. I had survived. And in surviving, by remembering the unseen connections, by knowing who owned the rails, I had not just recovered what was lost. I had positioned myself to build something new, something stronger, something truly mine. He taught me a harsh lesson about trust, about power, about the illusion of control. He thought the visible structure was everything. He forgot about the invisible infrastructure, the quiet forces that truly make the world move. He fired the architect of the engine and learned too late that the architect knew the man who owned the roads. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. And please, if you haven't already, subscribing truly helps bring more of these stories to life.